This is the very beginning of the text. Let those four words rest for a moment like a bell struck in a cathedral of time, its tone still vibrating in the ribcage of the cosmos. There is a kind of hush that precedes all revelation, a pregnant pause in which the architecture of fate rearranges itself, not cruelly nor randomly, but with the slow deliberation of a river carving a canyon through stone. When we say, "You are not late," the universe has been preparing you all along. We do not offer a platitude or a sugar-coated consolation. We unveil a lens, one that reframes urgency into readiness and panic into the quiet knowledge that the scaffolding beneath your life has been erected long before you noticed. Imagine for a moment that your existence is a door whose hinges have been oiled by countless tiny experiences, by lessons learned in the dark, by long winters that taught endurance and summers that grafted sweetness onto your branches. The world, in its vast and patient way, has not been holding you back. It has been honing you. To speak of preparation is to speak of time as a weaver and yourself as the fabric emerging from its loom. Threads of skill and sorrow, of joy and confusion, have been woven in patterns you could not yet read. There is always a tension between the inner clock and the outer calendar. The calendar ticks in neat boxes and deadlines, but the inner clock moves in spirals, folding seasons within seasons, aligning circumstances and capacities like planets finding a constellation. We often misunderstand timing because we are educated to see time as an arrow. The arrow feels urgent and linear, and when it seems to pass us by, we feel estranged, as though we have missed boarding a train invisible to everyone else. Yet the cosmos prefers the spiral. It brings us back to places we thought we'd left, gives us opportunities to step forward precisely when our heart and hands can carry them. In this spiral, lateness does not exist. What exists is readiness, the blossoming of internal conditions that match the external invitation. There is an invisible curriculum to living. Pain is not merely suffering. It is an exam where we learn the limits of our endurance and the pliancy of our hearts. Joy is not merely pleasure. It is a teacher that shows us how to inhabit abundance without collapse. Chance encounters, humiliations, unexpected teacher figures, and long stretches of boredom are all part of a syllabus written by an intelligence that is indifferent only to our vanity and exceedingly patient with our becoming. Consider the seed beneath the soil. Its time in darkness is not wasted but essential. The roots press and probe, mapping the subterranean world, while the embryo of the shoot transforms stored energies until the moment the earth warms enough for emergence. If the shoot rushed upward before its roots were formed, it would flop and fail. If it waited too long, frost might claim it. The seed does not measure time with panic. It responds to an inner logic and seasonal cues, and when it rises, it does so with authority. So too do you rise when the internal and external conditions conspire. Preparation ripens into action. This narrative does not absolve the cosmos of mystery. There are aspects of existence that feel arbitrary, cruel, or unbearably slow. Yet even there, a deeper pattern can be discerned if we attune our senses to the language of synchronicity and the quiet nudges that precede transformation. The universe prepares not only by orchestrating external events, but by cultivating temperament. It teaches patience. It sharpens discernment. It grinds away illusions until what remains is a person capable of wielding power without being devoured by it. Ask yourself, what in your life has felt like a rehearsal? Which skills have you accumulated while thinking they were mere hobbies, oddities, or detours? Which losses have left you with a peculiar strength, a compassion that now reads as an advantage? Most of us undercount such accumulations because we measure success in immediate results rather than in readiness. In reframing our perspective, we honor the slow craft of becoming. Practical significance blooms from this metaphysical soil. If you internalize the notion that you are not late, you cease to rush into ill-fitting roles or accept hurried compromises. You can recognize invitations that require more than energy, They require maturity and an inner calibration that takes time. This is not a call to passivity. Rather, it is an invitation to patience as an active force. Patience here is not waiting in paralysis but preparing with intention, cleaning your inner space, studying the map of your desires, tendering relationships, and refining your skill set until the moment arrives when you can say yes without fear. Likewise, acceptance of being on time is not resignation to fate. It is a partnership with a larger intelligence in which you become a co-creator. You learn to act with courage when the signs are right, and to sit with trust when they are not. There are also emotional implications. The narrative of being late breeds shame and comparison, damaging the subtle alchemy by which confidence is formed. When you believe you are late, you measure yourself against someone else's timeline and lose the thread of your unique patterning. Yet when you understand preparation as ongoing, your life becomes a story of alignment. You can forgive past mistakes because they were part of the curriculum, tenderly revising the inner narrative that has kept you small. This reframing empowers you to re-enter the world with a different energy, less frantic, more luminous, driven by curiosity rather than fear. The world begins to echo back to you in kinder ways because you have learned to meet opportunities with integrity. And so, as the bell's reverberation finally settles, know that what looks like delay is often the cosmos's quiet choreography. Whether you have been waiting months for a breakthrough or years for an opening, whether you carry the heavy residue of choices that seem to be shortcomings, or the quiet confidence of a life lived in careful increments, the message remains. This moment has been prepared for you. The details will unfold in shapes both expected and strange, but the bones of your readiness are already there, forged by small decisions, hard lessons, and secret joys. In the chapters that follow, we will peel back more of this hidden curriculum, mapping the ways the universe aligns circumstance and capacity, exploring the symbols it uses, and translating its ancient grammar into practical steps you can walk through today. For now, breathe and listen to the subterranean music beneath your life. You are not late. You are precisely where you were meant to be, standing at the threshold of a season that has been mourning, shaping, and loving you into presence. There is a quiet grammar to the cosmos, a syntax of timing that does not conform to our calendars or our anxious hurry. If you lean into it, you begin to hear not the clanging insistence of a clock, but the softer rhythms of seasons, tides, and the patient conversation between seed and soil. One of the first guiding pillars of the idea that you are not late is the recognition that time, as we commonly feel it, is an illusion shaped by human urgency. Beneath that illusion lies a deeper tempo, a field of arrangement where readiness and opportunity find each other not at a preordained hour, but when capacity equals circumstance. The universe is less a punctual clockmaker and more a careful architect, arranging elements, aligning forces, and waiting for the vessel to be shaped well enough to hold the gift. This is not resignation. It is acknowledgement that something profound often precedes the visible opening. What looks like delay, in the mind that insists on deadlines, is often the invisible labor of formation. The tempering of your edges, the slow weaving of relationships, and the refining of your inner instruments so that when the tuning note arrives, you will resonate with it instead of shattering. Imagine the world's most exquisite instrument being tuned. The craftsman does not rush, for haste ruins tone. The strings are tightened, tested, relaxed, and retuned across days. Each micro-adjustment answers to the whole, a counterintuitive choreography where patience is skill and preparation is art. This image maps onto the next pillar. Readiness is not a passive state but an active cultivation. It is a soft, persistent practice of aligning thought, habit, skill, and heart. It involves learning how to hold your center in discomfort, to practice small acts of courage, to pay attention to the things that make you luminous. The universe respects this practice. It answers not to frantic asking, but to disciplined becoming. The hidden curriculum is therefore relational. It asks not what you want immediately, but what you are becoming by the time the opportunity arrives. In other words, the cosmos values not the burst but the build, the accretion of integrity and experience that permits the life you picture to inhabit your actual circumstances without collapsing under its own weight. There is a third guiding idea that unravels a commonly held illusion, that causality is simple and linear. We are taught to look for single causes. This decision led to that result, but deeper patterns are braided, not straight. Life unfolds in spirals and networks, a fractal logic that repeats and refracts. You may have thought of your life as a line with milestones to be hit by dates on a calendar. The universe instead arranges fractal opportunities that amplify as your internal geometry changes. A failure in one domain becomes a teacher whose lesson reframes another. A relationship that once broke becomes a mirror that clarifies your values and thus attracts different people. What seemed like misalignment was often a rerouting, the redirection of energy so that it can meet a more fitting current later on. Thus the wise lens reads disappointments as secret instructions, and the patient heart learns to translate them into new strategies. This is not mystical vagueness. It is an invitation to perceive the hidden scaffolding of events and to translate recursion into meaning. Another pillar is the economy of capacity versus provision. The universe does not give its treasures to an empty chalice. There is a spiritual economy at work. Gifts are proportionate not only to desire, but to stewardship. This creates a moral and practical invitation to grow into the thing you seek. If you long for influence, what matters is your capacity to hold influence with integrity, your ability to listen, to not be corrupted by praise, to steward resources well. If you yearn for creative expression, the question becomes whether your craft has been practiced enough to sustain a public output without dissolving under critique. The cosmos, in its strange wisdom, often protects both you and the world by delaying openings until stewardship can be trusted. That delay is not punitive. It is protective and curative. It keeps the fruit from falling prematurely and rotting, and it allows the root system to deepen until the harvest is generous and enduring. Interwoven with these pillars is the dialectic of surrender and agency, which dissolves the false choice between passivity and frantic doing. Surrender here is not defeat. It is a luminous letting go of control while sustaining purpose. It is the humility to acknowledge that some variables must be tended by forces larger than your will, and the courage to act where action matters. The universe seems to conspire most vividly when you are willing to do your part and then step back with trust. That trust is not naive. It is informed by the repeated evidence that certain patterns recur. When you prepare, synchronicity accelerates. When you refine your container, opportunities arrive that test your refinement. Thus, the real work is twofold. Cultivate capacity, and then allow the constellation of causes to align without forcing them. This rhythm is like rowing in a river. Your strokes matter, but so does your rhythm with the current. There is skill in choosing which banks to aim for and wisdom in recognizing when to let the river carry you. Finally, the pattern of initiation reveals itself across cultures and across time. Mythmakers ink the schema of thresholds, trials, and returns into their stories because it is an archetype of how souls grow. You have been passing through many initiations, some visible loss, failure, heartbreak, and some subtle, an inner shift in taste, a waning of attachment, a sudden clarity. These are not arbitrary cruelties but calibrations, rituals that sharpen perception. The weight of these trials is not merely to test you but to expand you, to make your horizon wider and your sense of self more capacious. The universe, in that sense, is mercilessly tender. It will not place a crown on a brow that cannot bear it. So what feels like a block or a too late is often the final tempering before an emergence. Recognizing this reframes impatience into preparation, despair into apprenticeship. The deep truth is that the cosmos does not run on your timeline. It runs on a readiness code, and you are constantly writing that code with the small choices you make. Read the evidence of your own life, and you will begin to decode these patterns. Look back and see how what once felt like wasted years were actually the slow compilation of skills, relationships, and inner landscapes that made your current moment possible. Notice how certain doors opened only after a particular kind of pain had been integrated, how certain people arrived only after you had set down a different story about yourself. The guiding pillars cohere into a practice of wise attention. Notice the difference between cultural pressure and inner call, between frantic timelines and the slow rhythm of becoming. Cultivate capacity through small, steady acts. Honor the fractal, non-linear logic of events. Steward gifts responsibly, and dance with surrender while owning your work. In this way, the thought that you might be late dissolves into an awareness that the universe has been quietly, insistently preparing you, not to rush you forward, but to ready you so that, when the door opens, you step through with all the grace the moment requires. There is an old story of a smith who forged a single sword for a king who had not yet been born. The smith, having learned his trade in the heat of 100 forges, was told by a traveling oracle that a child of humble station would someday wear that blade and change the course of a small, stubborn kingdom. The smith sets the metal in the fire and hammers in rhythms learned from his father's hands. He quarries ore, tempers, quenches, sharpens, polishes, and throughout his life the blade is never claimed. Villagers laugh at the smith's obsession. Time is a jealous creditor and patience a brittle coin. Still, the smith keeps working because the sword has a peculiar memory. It holds the echo of the future that brought it into being. Years pass. The king arrives late, injured by a past of failed rebellions, carrying a map drawn in charcoal and unsteady hope. He finds the sword exactly as the oracle promised, balanced in weight and story. The sword, forged long before the moment it is needed, fits the hand that has learned to hold responsibility through scars. What looks like misplaced effort becomes the quiet architecture that supports destiny when readiness meets circumstance. Imagine another scene, a vast marsh where reeds and lily pads keep secret conferences with the moon. Beneath the water, roots tangle like old maps and seeds sleep within the dark, each waiting for a particular pattern of rain and warmth. A raven, impatient and bright-eyed, proclaims that spring will come early and flutters among the reeds, urging the seeds to wake. Some stir, but many remain unmoved, for the marsh has its own arithmetic. One seed, heavier than the rest, spends a long winter digesting the compost of last year's leaves. It grows a root the length of a story and waits for a frost that will thresh away a protective husk. When the thaw finally comes, the seed rises, not early, not late, but at the precise cadence the marsh rehearsed in silence. The emergent sprout carries within it the compost of seasons and the memory of burrowed nights, and when the first sunlight finds it, the sprout unfurls with the wisdom of patient calculation. The marsh teaches that readiness is not about speed, but about having completed a subterranean curriculum that the impatient cannot observe. There is a tale passed among those who tend to lighthouses. A young keeper, new to tides and storms, inherits a lamp that has been polished through generations. The elders, who themselves were once novices, speak tenderly of maintenance. The lenses must be cleaned, the gears oiled, the flame trained to dance a specific way when fog rolls in. The young keeper wants to see immediate results, to watch ships sail safely within a week and to be hailed for competence. Yet every storm tests more than the lamp. It measures the keeper's steadiness, their ability to listen to the wind's grammar and to repair a broken pulley in the dark. A season of small mishaps teaches the keeper how to anticipate, how to read the swell of the sea like a slowly written note. One night, a ship blind to charts drifts toward jagged rock. The keeper, now tempered by the hidden lessons of routine and failure, strikes a match with hands that do not tremble. The lamp answers with a sure beam that cuts through fog. In that instant, the lamp and the keeper, prepared together by repetition and quiet failure, reveal the universe's gentle insistence. You are not late because preparation took the form it needed to underwrite the moment of rescue. Consider the craftsman who weaves tapestries not by pattern but by attending to the peculiar gaps in the cloth as he goes. He is taught to leave a space, a missing thread, because the pattern of a future guest will require that exact vacancy. Outsiders call his technique careless. The threads seem chaotic and unplanned. Yet there are times when a traveler arrives, bearing a story or a wound that will only be held by that missing space. The weaver's habit of leaving room, of listening for an absence that might become necessary, embodies the universe's softer logic. What appears as lack is often a held place reserved for what must fit later. This is not passive waiting but an active stewardship of possibility, an alchemy of restraint that knows when to bind and when to leave an aperture for the unknown. A quietly mythical mountain holds another parable. On its slopes lives a community of climbers whose religion is patience. They repeat a phrase not as prayer but as method. The summit is not the point. The body that reaches the summit is. Young climbers rush, scrabble for higher camps, and boast of peaks seen on postcards. But those who are taught to regard the ascent itself as a curriculum learn to measure their days and practices. The carrying of loads, the nights spent in thin air practicing breath, the mending of cracked boots by lamplight. One climber, ridiculed for years for slow progress, finally reaches the ridge after decades of steady, unglamorous work. At the peak she is not only strong but seasoned with an empathy carved by exposure. She knows where to place ropes for those who follow, which bluffs hold and which break. The mountain does not rush to reward the quick. It prepares architects of safe passage, people who will steward the path for generations. In this way, lateness becomes a necessary curriculum for those who will become keepers rather than conquerors. These stories are not mere fables to be swallowed whole. They are mirrors held up to the inner architecture of timing. Each allegory emphasizes a different face of the same jewel: tempering, subterranean preparation, the sanctity of practiced failure, the intentional leaving of space, and the slow shaping of guardians. They unfold a simple thesis. The universe's preparation is not an external conveyor belt that belches out readiness at arbitrary hours. It is an intimate pedagogy that arranges conditions so that capability, ethical clarity, and the capacity to hold consequence can arise. In listening to these tales, notice the recurring pattern. What was necessary could not be manufactured at the last minute. The sword required a lifetime of hammer strikes. The marsh seed demanded cycles of darkness. The lighthouse keeper needed nights of fumbling practice. The weaver conserved absence. The climber accrued patience. We are each living mosaics of such stories, carrying within us the smith, the seed, the keeper, the weaver, and the climber. To say you are not late is to recognize your own internal folklore. The parts of you that have been quietly learning, failing, and carving space, so that when the right door opens, you step through not as someone who stumbled upon destiny, but as someone whose careful, sometimes invisible preparation made the passage possible. If the world has been arranging itself like a subtle classroom around you, then the task now is not to sprint for a door that is not yours, but to bring the wisdom of that preparation into the texture of your ordinary hours. Begin by seeing daily life as the continuing laboratory of becoming rather than a series of deadlines that determine worth. There is a practical magic in this reorientation. When you regard a day not simply as a ledger of accomplishments, but as a place to practice patience, to rehearse skill, and to tend to the slow work of interior alignment, the small gestures accumulate into a deep competence. This does not mean inaction or complacency. It means choosing actions that are consonant with the long arc of development. You will find that tending to small disciplines, keeping promises to yourself, showing up to the scrape and grind of practice, allowing failure to be recorded rather than erased, Wins the internal spring that will release powerfully when the hour of consequence arrives. The universe's preparation is not an external miracle that replaces labor. It is the secret curriculum that rewards those who are willing to do the daily, often invisible, forging. Translate the metaphors of seed and smith into concrete routines that honor incubation. Allow for seasons of not knowing as part of the work. Set aside blocks of time where exploration is primary and productivity is measured by curiosity and learning rather than immediate output. Create margins in your calendar, not as emptiness to be filled with busyness, but as hollows for ideas to take root. These margins are the compost heap of future brilliance. Practically, this could mean scheduling days where you read, take long walks without a phone, sketch, tinker, or practice a craft without a deadline. In relationships, it might show up as giving space for someone to develop rather than pushing them into premature declarations. In careers, it can look like taking on apprenticeships, internships, or projects that build muscle instead of chasing titles. The intentional delay of premature closure often feels like sacrifice in a culture of speed, but it is an act of fidelity to the deeper timetable of capability. There is also an ethical dimension to this readiness that must inform how you act in the world. The narrative that you are not late implies responsibility. The universe has built within you capacities and constraints with which to hold consequence. When an opportunity appears, ask whether your readiness includes the moral clarity to use influence with restraint, wisdom, and compassion. This is not idle sermonizing. It is a practical filter for decision-making. Before saying yes to a platform, a promotion, or a public pronouncement, pause to consider if your internal training includes the capacity to steward that space. If you accept prematurely, you risk causing harm that could have been avoided by more preparation. If you decline with humility and recommit to growth, you are aligning with the universe's pedagogy and protecting others as well as yourself. This kind of discernment becomes easier when you practice small acts of restraint in everyday life, not answering on impulse, checking motives, consulting trusted mentors, and letting time test inclination. Another way the grand patterns fold into the mundane is through the rituals and structures you cultivate to support transformation. Rituals are not relics of superstition, but technologies of attention. They shape the psyche and mark thresholds so that transitions are less accidental and more sanctified. A morning ritual that centers breath and intention is a plumbing of the soul that steadies you against the jerky demands of the day. Ceremonies for endings, clearing a workspace, writing a letter to a finished chapter, performing a small ritual of release, create the psychological space for new beginnings to arrive intact. In creative work, ritualizing the beginning and end of a session helps to create sustained practice without the tyranny of perfectionism. In parenting or partnership, rituals of welcome and farewell, shared meals, bedtime stories, moments of gratitude, build a slow architecture of trust and presence. These practices embed the cosmic pedagogy into lived time. They are scaffolding that makes the invisible work visible and sustainable. Practical integration also requires a reorientation of goals from outcome to orientation. Instead of framing success as getting to a destination by a particular date, orient yourself around the person you are becoming. This subtle shift changes daily choices dramatically. Where once you might have sacrificed rest for a deadline, you now preserve sleep as a non-negotiable because you understand that stamina is an ingredient you cannot synthesize at the last minute. Where once you chased recognition as proof of value, you now pursue craft and ethical growth, letting accolades when they come be byproducts, not the aim. This approach reduces the anxiety born of comparison. When the timeline is internal and character-based, you can measure progress by your capacity for patience, humility, and sustained attention, rather than by external signals that often arrive out of rhythm. Community is the practical soil in which the idea of not being late grows roots. Seek mentors and peers who respect slow cultivation. Align with people who have demonstrated the endurance and integrity you aspire to embody. Apprenticeship is not merely a romantic throwback. It is a pragmatic path for acquiring tacit knowledge that no book can fully transmit. Equally, offer yourself as a steward to others in their slow work. Teaching is a form of learning, and in guiding someone through their season of preparing, you refine your own mastery and compassion. Networks that value depth over speed become sanctuaries for those feeling hurried by the world and offer practical accountability for long-term projects. Cultivating such relationships requires humility and the willingness to be both vulnerable and patient. But the returns, shared wisdom, sustained encouragement, and a buffer against the culture of instant, are tangible and life-altering. Finally, embed the practice of reflection into your rhythm so that the lessons of failure and waiting become resources rather than wounds. Keep a journal where you map patterns of learning, not as a record of shame, but as an archaeology of growth. Periodically review your own story to see how past latenesses were actually gestational chambers. By narrating these experiences with curiosity, you train your memory to recognize the universe's secret curriculum. This reflective habit makes you less likely to repeat frantic choices and more likely to steward opportunities with the steadiness that preparation brings. The cosmic assurance that you are not late becomes a living tool. It steadies decisions, preserves integrity, and invites you to live as a slow, deliberate guardian of the time you have been given. We have walked through a corridor of ideas together, listening to the echo of a single insistence. You are not late. That insistence is not a platitude but a lens, a hidden apparatus that reframes disquiet into readiness, anxiety into apprenticeship, and delay into design. Imagine the cosmos as a slow, patient loom, where your life is a thread woven into patterns too vast for a single glance to grasp. Each twist, each pause, each knot that looks like misstep from the surface is part of a larger pattern that only reveals itself through time, attention, and the steady pull of curiosity. This final passage is both an invitation and a benediction, to accept the architecture that has been building beneath your feet and to become, deliberately, a steward of the continued unwinding. When we consider the themes that have guided our exploration, timing as wisdom, preparation as a living process, symbolism as a map, and practical integration as sacred labor, we begin to see a theme that runs through every example of meaningful emergence. Lives that arrive suddenly into public view are rarely sprung from nowhere. They are often the visible crowns of subterranean seasons of tending. A musician's effortless phrase echoes years of habit and solitude. A leader's decisive presence carries the weight of many quiet resets. The universe, in this telling, is less a judge of punctuality and more a midwife. It does not hurry birth, it orchestrates readiness. To live with this understanding is to turn toward your own interior scaffolding with reverence rather than reproach. There is a tenderness embedded in that reframing, tenderness toward our mistakes, our delinquencies, and our weeks when nothing appears to change. Tenderness does not excuse inertia. It dissolves the inner tyrant that confuses speed with worth. This is not an argument for complacency, but for intelligent pacing, an economy of attention that invests in what will endure. When your choices are aligned with the sense that you are being prepared, you begin to notice the difference between frantic fixing and patient cultivation. You begin to practice the small, ordinary rituals that sustain growth. A morning hour of deliberate work, a weekly conversation that resists urgency and seeks depth, a journal entry that traces patterns rather than policing failures. These are not magic bullets, but they are the slow alchemy through which latent capacities turn into actual gifts. Our symbolic narratives have given us images to carry when the world asks only for results. The seed that refuses to panic when the frost stubbornly lingers. The artisan who spends quiet decades learning the turn of grain against the chisel. The traveler who navigates by hidden landmarks, not by the hurried sun. Such images do more than comfort. They rewire perception. They help us recognize the traces of preparation already embedded in our own lives, the patient teachers, the failed projects that taught resilience, the friendships that tempered our edges. Seeing your past through this mythic lens transposes mistaken shame into resource. Past latenesses become chapters of apprenticeship, not stains on the soul. And yet understanding is not enough by itself. Integration asks for both heart and praxis. To make the cosmic assurance practical is to cultivate environments that honor depth, communities that applaud incremental mastery, workplaces that reward sustained learning, families that ritualize presence. It means saying no to several seductive urgencies in favor of the deeper yes that requires time. It means accepting that some forms of knowledge cannot be accelerated. They need weather and repetition to consolidate. From this place, patience is not a passive stance but an active stewardship of time and attention, choosing the longer arc rather than the flash. This stewardship becomes a daily art, to attend, to revise, to teach, to lean into failure as curriculum rather than catastrophe. Transformation grows in the space between understanding and practice, in the quiet, patient doing that over time amasses into a new orientation. Imagine now that the universe's preparation has been less about lining up external events and more about shaping your capacity to hold complexity with grace. What you have been trained for might be unseen: resilience, the ability to listen under noise, the generosity to lead without reflexive power grasping, the patience to translate vision into sustainable structures. When those capacities awaken, the opportunities that have been circling like migratory birds will not pass you like an unmoored ship. You will be ready, not because the universe favored you with timing, but because you and the universe have been working in concert. To close this chapter requires an inward turn, a practice of honest interrogation that is tender rather than cruel. Ask yourself, which of my perceived delays were actually seasons of necessary preparation? Or have I mistaken speed for mastery and missed the slow teaching beneath the surface? Who in my life models the steady embrace of time, and how might I learn from them? Allow these questions to land like seeds. Do not demand immediate harvest. Let them germinate through small rituals of attention, moments of silence before decisions, a weekly ledger of lessons learned, a commitment to one long-term project that resists the metrics of instant gratification. These acts are not grand gestures, but the daily fidelity that converts cosmic promise into lived reality. Finally, carry this assurance into your relationship with others. The conviction that you are not late invites compassion for the timelines of those around you. It invites mentoring without haste, listening without the need to fix, and community structures that honor slow becoming. When you hold your own temperate timeline with trust, you are less likely to project scarcity onto others. Instead of measuring their worth by speed, you begin to appreciate the invisible scaffolding they are building. That perspective changes how we lead, love, and enact justice. It creates social ecosystems where preparation is visible and valued. So go forth not hurried but steady, not resigned but expectant. Remember that every silence you endure, every small practice you keep, every patient lesson you accept, is a form of co-creation with a universe that has been preparing you all along. Let that realization soften the sharp edges of panic and embolden the quieter muscles of perseverance. There is a distinct kind of freedom in knowing you are not late. It frees you from frantic measures, aligns you with time's deeper currents, and invites you to steward your unfolding with humility and courage. Live now as if you have been apprenticed to the great craft of becoming, and let your life be the proof that what waits is not absence but readiness.